if we look at both of these fighters and what they bring to the table, they occupy the same space. They're opposite ends of the spectrum when it comes to pace. I think McGregor's the one that's got the power. I think Poirier's the one that's got the volume. I think Poirier does his best work when he's forcing his opponent up against the fence when he's in a square stance. And I think McGregor does his best work when he's got his opponent backed up against the fence in a long stance. I think McGregor's in and out movement's excellent. I think Poirier's lateral movement's excellent. I think Poirier's got good movement moving forward, but he's got to be throwing as he's doing it. McGregor can be moving forward and making you feel like something's happening, which is enough to shut most of his opponents down. So if you look at the best attributes of these fighters and how they come together, one of them has to win the center control. Otherwise, one of them's going to be forced to counterpunch, and neither of them like to do that. Poirier doesn't do counterpunching very well. He loses rounds going backwards if he's forced in that direction. Not that he's not dangerous, but he's not as calculated moving backwards as he is moving forwards. We've seen at times in McGregor's game that he can be very calculated moving back, and he can be lethal. I mean, even the Aldo knockout was a counterpunch. Just because he moved back, a step and a half, it doesn't mean he wasn't moving back when the punch was delivered. And there are a few of those occasions, even in the Nate Diaz fight, where Diaz walks into the center all confident and McGregor just jams him with a short left as he's coming in. He's very good at utilizing people's forward momentum. But that's where the tidal wave overwhelms the one strong guy standing there ready to withstand the force. You just can't do it with the volume that Poirier throws. You've got to land that first shot, otherwise you're going to get barreled over. So if you think about those exchanges, if you think about those points where either Poirier's backed up against the fence and McGregor's pressing him, or Poirier's backed up against the fence and McGregor's being pressed, they look very different. Even though they're switching roles and they're occupying that same space, they're trying to aggress onto their opponent into the fence. Their tactical approach is very different. And they present, going back to the lessons of war thing, the MMA stance is a spectrum. The main stance in the middle is somewhere between Poirier and McGregor. But the extremes of both of their stances is opposite ends of the spectrum, because you've got McGregor who's standing really long, which I call chaser. And then you've got Poirier who's standing really wide, which I call broadside. And I use them with because it's a naval connection. If a galleon is chasing, it's using the smaller caliber cannons at the front, and it's got a longer range on those cannons. So they've got to be accurate, but they've got more variety they've got more ability to hit from a distance, which is where McGregor's at. Poirier, on the flip side, he stands broadside, he stands square, and the reason that a battleship, a galleon, would position themselves in that direction in front of an opponent is because they can then use that whole battery of cannons. It puts them in a very powerful position where they can generate so much firepower into their opponents, but the danger is that they're broadside, so they're also vulnerable to the firepower returning. I think once Poirier's got through that stage of McGregor's game where he's no longer standing long, I think then Poirier's all over him. And then he's going to be forcing McGregor to cover and to level change and to do things out of panic that he doesn't want to do. And then if McGregor does level change, he's going into a submission game, which is not as strong as Nate Diaz, but the fatigue coupled with the good DOS jokes of Dustin Poirier is not a good mix for McGregor. So I think if he does feel like he's going to end up backed up against the fence at some point, maybe allow Poirier to come to him when he's still fresh. Work that lead leg, give some variety to his game so he's not so entirely focused on that left hand. And for Poirier, he's got to move forward under cover. He's got to throw mortars over the top while he's tunneling underneath, because if he just moves forward against McGregor, he's going to get picked off on the way. But if he moves forward with a game plan, with an attack that McGregor's got to think about, that's a different thing. The battle for the center is going to be the key, and that's really where it gets interesting. And I think that if McGregor wins the battle in the early rounds, he's got the potential to knock Poirier out into the middle of the second round. I think even if Poirier loses the center, he could still win this fight over the championship rounds, over the distance, because he'll get stronger third, fourth, and fifth. If Poirier wins the battle of the center in the first round, he's potentially going to be walking onto a power punch of McGregor's because he's being set up, because McGregor's not going to allow him to control the center. And the one other thing I will say is that Poirier grounded him 30 seconds into the second fight. McGregor's not going to be taken down just as easily the next time around. He was taken down in the second fight because he was so focused on his own game plan, his left hand, he completely disregarded the potential for a takedown. His takedown defense is still very good. I think if Poirier works for a takedown, he might not get it, but the benefit is making McGregor work. I think that's the game plan for the first round and a half for Poirier. Stay away from the left hand, make him work as much as possible, and don't fight out of emotion. For McGregor, I feel like there's a lot on the line for him. I feel like there's pressure coming into this one, unlike other fights of his. You know, there was pressure coming into the Nate Diaz fight because he'd already lost to Nate Diaz, and if he lost a second time to the same guy, his brand would be diminished. This is a rubber match. This is the trilogy. There is no coming back from this. I don't think if he loses here, unless it's a controversial one. If Poirier stops him a second time, Conor McGregor is now, he's now there for super fights. He's no longer in the running for a title shot. But it's also damaging to his brand and to everything that he applies his brand to, whether that's whiskey or sneakers or diet plans or whatever. Pressure coming in this one is on McGregor's shoulders. Poirier's picked himself up before and he's carried himself back to the top. I think he shows up and tries to do his job best he can. I think the wild card is how McGregor shows up and what his preparation's been like. I'm leaning towards McGregor, but not out of any logical mind. I think if they fought 10 times, I think Poirier probably wins 60 or 70% of them, just purely because of the margins for Conor to win are slimmer the longer the fight goes. And I think Poirier is smart enough and durable enough to be able to stay away from the left hand of McGregor most of the time. But there's something about this one that's kind of leaning me in McGregor's direction. He's a big game fighter. When the stakes are the highest, when he's backed into a corner, when you don't think he's going to possibly be able to do this, he's one of those guys that can kind of pull it out the bag. He's a star player for a reason. There's a reason that people tune in to watch his fights.